I am Clara Kim. I am the Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs here at MOCA, and I am very pleased to introduce the program for today. I'm here, as you can see, with Haegue Yang, an incredible artist who we're so delighted to be working with. So welcome, Haegue. Round of applause for you. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this day-long symposium, Star-Crossed Rendezvous, the musical legacy of Isang Yun. Whether you are here as a devoted follower of Isang Yun's music, or if you're here because you're curious about learning more about this under-recognized figure, our program today promises to be incredibly enriching. I hope you all have a moment to familiarize yourself with the program. I think most of you picked up this really great program as you walked in, which outlines the schedule for the day, the biographies of the illustrious panel of speakers we have with us today, as well as an introduction to Isang Yun. The event would not have been possible without the inspiration and motivation of many people. First and foremost, I want to thank Haegue Yang. Haegue is an artist who has been interested in Isang Yun for some time and who has spent the last 10 years privately and quietly researching his life and his work. Her engagement with Yun came to a head in 2024 when she premiered this installation. You'll see many images throughout the day. An immersive installation called Star-Crossed Rendezvous after Yun in London at the Haegue Gallery in October 2024. And some of you were there with me when we experienced that incredible installation, Margaret Morgan, Deborah Ermis. And it was at this time that we invited Haegue to show and present that work here at MOCA. The work features a recording of Isang Yun's double concerto from 1977 and departs from Yun's references to Korean mythology, and we'll hear a lot about that mythology from our speakers throughout the day. I'm thrilled to share that the installation will be open here at MOCA Grand Avenue in our galleries upstairs in March 2026. And equally thrilled that we'll be collaborating with the LA Philharmonic in presenting that work. So on March 10th, mark your calendars, 2026, we'll be having a preview of the installation here, followed by a concert by LA Phil musicians that evening. So very much looking forward to that. This symposium, which precedes the events in the spring, is the first academic convening devoted to Isang Yun in North America. And we've established that with our very informed speakers today. So it's quite special to be able to hosting it. And for a contemporary art museum, the core of what we do, of MOCA's mission, is very much driven by artists and artists leading the way. And so through the invitation of Haegue, we've had this incredible opportunity to host this convening today. Sorry for my very long remarks. We're thrilled to have an amazing, truly inspiring group of speakers and performers with us today. This morning, we will hear from Ryan Dohoney, Professor of Musicology and Associate Dean for Faculty in the Bienen School of Music at Northwestern University, and followed by Jungmin Mina Lee's keynote. Mina is a Professor of Music History at Juilliard. And lastly, I want to thank the sponsors for this program, for both the symposium, which was made possible through the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism of Korea, the Korea Arts Management Service, and Korea Focus Support Program. We are grateful to their recognition of this timely engagement with Yun's legacy. Some of the distinguished supporters of our exhibition, which will follow in March, are here with us today, and I want to thank again Margaret Morgan and Wesley Foa for their support and encouragement and generosity in making this possible. I also want to thank Deborah Ermis here as part of the MOCA Global Council, which is a major supporter of the program in March. I also want to thank Terry and Jerry Cole, Mickey Lee from CJENM, and the Projects Council for supporting this exciting collaboration. And finally, I want to thank the team that made this program possible and my collaborator and partner, Paula Kroll, assistant curator. This would not be possible with Paula and her impeccable organization, and thank you, Paula, for all your incredible work on this, along with Michelle Huizar, performance coordinator, who is here with us. Michelle, thank you very much. And lastly, I also want to thank the musicians at Colburn School, and it was our conversation with Nick Giannopoulos, the Director of Artistic Administration there, that allowed for a presentation of the music, of which you'll hear this afternoon. And I also want to call out our LA Phil partners, Mark McNeil and Julia Ward. We've had some great meetings, and we want to thank you for this very exciting collaboration. Thank you. What? Are they entering? Oh, Mark, we just thanked you. And now I'm going to hand it over to Haegue. We're very excited about this day's program and afternoon program, and want to thank and welcome Haegue again.
I actually didn't prepare any speech. I tried to be just a listen today. Also just want to thank everybody, and especially MOCA, to host this event. But it maybe appear like an event, but it has been a journey for me. And so far, until I met all these amazing scholars, it has been rather a lonely journey, maybe very singular journey. So it's maybe different phase of the journey, and I really like the fact that we make a multiple an event through scattered around the time, that we build a community like you today, and to join this trip and excavating a figure and the music and maybe artistic engagement with the world around the figure. And the time has passed, and I think we can carve this figure again anew on our own term. Very at the beginning, I was a bit doubting to bring Isang Yun all the way to US, where maybe he hasn't been active in his lifetime massively. His music has not played much, but I think it's really up to us, and maybe that's what contemporary artists and art institutions do, you know, mixing the time and reinvent the time for ourselves. I hope we discover together many things. Thank you so much for being here with us. So I prepared as my little contribution like small kind of slide film to introduce the figure, that maybe we get our knowledge refreshed in a kind of short chronology. I think it might maybe serve as an introduction, and that's small contribution I brought today. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. First, thanks to Clara, Paula, Michelle, and Haegue for this invitation and for all their hard work putting everything together. Need to change my glasses. Great, so I'm Ryan Dehoney. I'm coming from Northwestern University, and it's wonderful to be here with my colleagues. Can everyone hear me okay? Is that all right? Okay. Sure, okay, I'll do what I can. Sorry, I'll bring in the mic a bit. Great. Okay, so today, MOCA and Haegue Yang invite us to reflect upon artistic kinship and its capacity for world building. Unlike Yang and Isang Yun, I do not identify as an artist. I interpret artistic lives and works. I'm what the poet Frank O'Hara called a balayeur des artistes. I'm someone who sweeps up after them. Artistic kinship has been the going concern of my research and writing and teaching for a long while now, and I think about it at least in two senses. The first is a literal sense of kinship between artists, namely their friendships. In my two books on composer Morton Feldman, I took his friendships as the focus of my analysis. Through that analysis, I revealed mid-century modernism's entanglement with petroleum-fueled patronage, French Catholic revivalism, Jewish mysticism, abstract expressionism, and existential philosophy. Friendship was the skeleton key unlocking hidden kinships between music, painting, and poetry. I argued that these arts are aesthetically connected because they were grounded in an actual economy of affection, not because they shared the formalist purity promulgated by art critics like Clement Greenberg. I also think about artistic kinship in another sense germane to our conversation today, kinship between artistic practices, aesthetic ideals, and affective models of creativity. We have many names for this in the scholarly business: synesthesia, pseudomorphosis, and ekphrasis, but we might as well just call them translations between sight and sound. Indeed, artists have often asked us to translate our experiences from one sense to another. Arnold Schoenberg's orchestral piece titled Farben, Colors, pictured here, suggests that we see the orchestral sounds as much as hear them. And numerous painters insist that we hear their images. Wassily Kandinsky, a friend of Schoenberg's, is a well-known example of a painter who leaned on music to support his abstractions. We can see here his improvisation 28, which equates painterly practice with musical fantasy. One more familiar example of sound becoming image is Edvard Munch's The Scream, wherein vocal terror unmoors the very fabric of reality. We sense such erosion, too, in another famous painting of a scream, Francis Bacon's study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X. In both examples, to quote Peter Schwenger, paint translates audio stimulus into a visual one. Such artworks reveal the fundamental unity of our perceptions as they short-circuit one sense into another. But there's something special about sound. As philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty wrote, quote, "Music is not in visible space. Music erodes visible space, surrounds it, and causes it to shift," end quote. In the past couple of years, I've been hung up on Merleau-Ponty's insight and explored just how music causes visible space to shift, how artistic practices mediate between senses and proffer an experience not only of our embodied unity, but also our interpersonal relationships like friendship. Along these lines, I want to explore today Haegue Yang and Isang Yun's relationship as a form of posthumous friendship and sensorial translation, in which Yang, through her nurturing of Yun's legacy, cares for the dead. This care takes the form of what I'm tentatively calling ekphrastic dispersion. The sound of Yun's music animates Yang's work and has inspired some of her artworks and accompanies her exhibitions. Broadly defined, Yang works through ekphrasis, that is the rendering of one art form by means of another. Ekphrasis is a translational practice that affects what Lawrence Venuti calls a radical decontextualization, a process of interpretation that omits or alters salient aspects of a source or artwork. This decontextualization is also a strong recontextualization affected by a shift between media. The ekphrastic work that is the occasion for our gathering today is Yang's star-crossed Rendezvous after Yun from 2024, in which Yun's double concerto for oboe and harp is recontextualized in a space filled with Venetian blinds and synchronized lights. Let's take a look and listen of a brief excerpt. What then are the guiding principles of such ekphrastic dispersion in Yang's art? Often she looks for synchronicities. For instance, she has juxtaposed the biographies of French writer Marguerite Duras and Isang Yun to explore quirks of historical alignment. Yang's installation, accommodating the epic dispersion, is a similar performance of creative anachronism. Art historian Lara Vergara writes of this work, and you can see the quote on the slide here, quote, Yang's practice can be understood to approach history in an untimely manner, accommodating the epic dispersion on non-cathartic volume of Dispersion 2010, an installation commissioned by Haus der Kunst in Munich, exemplifies her methodological approach to history through abstract sculpture, a process often grounded in extensive research of historical events, which she arrives at through literature rather than conventional history writing. Accommodating the epic dispersion is inspired by the writings of Korean-Japanese author Soo Kyung-sik on the life of Italian Auschwitz survivor Primo Levi, which traces parallelisms between the Holocaust and the history of Korea since its annexation by Japan in 1910, end quote. To understand how Yang abstracts historical events into an installation using Venetian blinds as material takes some incisive hermeneutics. As I understand it, Yang extracts a shared experience of captivity from Sun and Levy's writings. She then compresses these historical narratives, shaping them into post-conceptual sculpture that generates a shared feeling tone. As you can see here, people move in relationship to the sculpture, finding themselves restrained, their movement blocked as they circle around it. Yang takes a sensation of restraint and translates it into physical form. Such imagined relationships are the foundation of Yang's cross-disciplinary rendezvous. She empathetically imagines a community of artists united by common concerns. So building on Yang's own historical method, I want to draw out correspondences between her work and that of Isang Yun. Putting them in relationship to one another clarifies a shared aspect of their practice, a transcultural engagement with both Korean and Euro-American modernisms. So my goal for the rest of the talk is to turn Yang's method onto herself, juxtaposing the histories of both her and Yun to imagine what she hears in Yun's music, why she finds it meaningful. My hope is that by clarifying this connection, we can see how ekphrastic modes disperse across their authorships. So immediately we can note biographical connections, a South Korea to Germany axis of movement for both, an interest in international style modernism, and settlement in post-war Germany as a site of opportunity. This entangles them in larger processes of 20th and 21st century migration and circulation. It also situates them as practitioners of a broad-minded modernism, grounded in the relational exchange between one's own cultural specifics, interests and experiences, and other languages and modes of expression that they adopt. Yang and Yun exemplify a broader history of artistic praxis in which nothing human is alien to creativity. Given particular constraints and opportunities, artists can productively engage with other expressive codes and make them their own. This is not to say that matters of privilege, power, and ownership are irrelevant, but that Yang and Yun critically and empathetically assess the reciprocity of artistic exchange. The choice to become a cosmopolitan modernist can be a necessary choice and a mode of escape. This we see with Yun. He fled military dictatorship, was kidnapped, imprisoned, and ultimately released, then returned to West Germany and took citizenship there. But beyond biographical correspondences, what feeling tones and aesthetic strategies might Yun and Yang share? In the catalog essay for Yang's 2024 show of flat works at the Arts Club of Chicago, Oriana Cachone wrote, quote, and you can see this quote on the slide here, Yang's flat works and sculptures are irrevocably connected. They act in parallel dimensions that allow Yang to experiment with a range of strategies and operations that are often recuperated and exchanged between 2 and 3 dimensions. Yet the flat works contest their own flatness. They open themselves to space, of other dimensions, of objects, of folds, and of absence. And as such, the flat works are not flat at all. They are sites of compression, paradoxically revealing a depth of space. For Yang, flattening is a synonym for abstraction, and this abstraction acts across dimensions to infiltrate and deconstruct ways of knowing in contemporary society. And then this last paragraph here. So objects, spaces, and places alike are flattened and expanded, folded and unfolded, faceted, shifted, and made askew. Oscillating between 2 and 3 dimensions, Yang challenges standardized systems of organization, production, taxonomy, economy, and movement to unveil the ways in which they limit, order, and structure daily life, and suggest other ways of knowing and being in the world, end quote. It's a long quote, but I think it really gets at something important for me about what Haegue is doing. So, flattening as abstraction is what I want to zoom in on. Is this not how Yang works? She oftentimes will take matter and flatten it out into collages, such as in the Trustworthies series. Flattening, too, holds disparate materials together. Even when compressed, matter resists being shifted into forced compliance. Yang's lacquer paintings, some of which you can see here, are a good example of this. The material refuses to be compressed into the picture plane, even as it is covered with layers and layers of lacquer. Another series, the non-foldings, are the result of spray painting 3-dimensional objects to create 2-dimensional renderings on paper. Compression, resistance, refusal, restraint, these are political and aesthetic conditions. Yang opens up the potential of their realization through form as she creates physical works in 3 or 2 dimensions, which reconfigure the spaces we inhabit. So might the aesthetic strategy of compression be a useful way to hear Yun's music? Flatness has its own history in musical modernism. Morton Feldman spoke of what he called the picture plane as a sonic concept. Flatness can be heard as homophony and stasis, or as quietude and lack of affect. Flatness, though, can be overcome through registral expansion, complex counterpoint, and multi-voiced musical discourse. Compression has technological valences that also come into play in our listening experiences. The compression of information creates noise, and information density leads to perceptual overwhelm as sounds pile up, one on top of the other. It can push us toward the mathematical sublime. These are certainly both audible in Yun's work. Yet thinking with Yang, I'm also impressed with the reduction of musical material that gives Yun's music a compressed energy. So building on the metaphor of compression, I'll now trace 3 forms it takes in Yun's music. First is the compression of sonic information. Next, the reduction of melodic lines to single notes. And finally, the compression of European and Korean musical traditions into one another. I'll then conclude with a more direct comparison of Yun and Yang's works. So, first, compression can be conceived of as information density, noise, and dissonance. Yun composed in a post-World War II European modernist vocabulary in which consonance and dissonance are given equal aesthetic validity. Composers expanded musical resources beyond tonality and were not always interested in making pretty sounds. And so here's a bit from the beginning of Yun's piano solo Interludium A. We can see with the score certain kinds of density. First of all, you can see these kind of cluster tones, which appear in red here. Maybe, there we go. And then kind of these fast filigree gestures as well. Ah, there we go, okay. And there. And I think one more. There we go, one more. Sorry, I'm having problems directing where the pointer should go. And so let's take a bit of a listen to this so you can get his music in our ears again. The second type of compression that I'm thinking about is Yun's flattening of melodic material. Frequently, he compresses his melodies to a single note. If there's a compositional technique that he's known for, it's this, what in German is called the Hauptton technique, or in English, the main tone technique. He describes it like this, quote, "One can liken our tones to brushstrokes." Just to pause there, I think it's an interesting visual art comparison that he makes right there with this technique. One can liken our tones to brushstrokes, in contrast to the line of a drawing pencil. From beginning to end, each tone is submitted to transformation. It's embellished with ornaments, appoggiaturas, trills, glissandi, and dynamic modifications. Above all, the natural vibration of each tone is deliberately employed as a means of design. The modifications of a tone in pitch are regarded not so much as melody-forming intervals, rather, in their ornamental function and as parts of the expressive register, they are understood as one and the same tone, end quote. I want to zoom in on the idea that modifications of notes can be, quote, understood as one and the same tone, end quote. The natural vibration of each tone is deliberately employed as a means of design. In Yun's description, we see what I was referencing earlier vis-a-vis Yang's work. Compressed material retains a certain tension within it that pushes beyond its boundaries. An individual note has a vibrating energy that goes outward towards other notes. This is a very interesting philosophical idea that I won't necessarily go into, but it's something that Yun makes a whole compositional style out of, and that is indebted to his experience with Korean music traditions. Here's a bit of what that can sound like. It's a piece from 1971 called Namo, composed after he's returned to West Berlin from South Korea. It sets a Buddhist prayer text, and it's a piece that I find absolutely terrifying. And so you have a lot of this, oh, this note sort of going kind of consistently through the whole thing. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to keep going. So, great. So you can see, you can go in the notation. You can see right that there's a kind of consistent focus on a particular pitch. The sopranos pull away from it and then are kind of tethered back to it. And this is something that Yun heard in Korean courtly music traditions. And I'm grateful to Taek-soo Kim for this particular example. And so you can see an example here from Jeongga, which translates into righteous song. And you can hear a similar kind of focus on a single melodic note in this example. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead. There's another example too, the Korean tradition of pansori, which I think timbrally is something of what Yun is trying to get at in the piece Namo, but you can also hear a similar focus on kind of a consistent melodic pitch. All right, so a lot of focus on this particular note, right? So it's a similar idea for how Yun is thinking about these kind of pitch areas in his work. And so we can see a kind of late example of this in Yun's work in a cello and piano duo from 1992, written just 3 years before his death. As in Namo, focal pitches are inflected chromatically, and there's palpable tension felt as the cello strays and snaps back. Formally, Yun defines sections of the piece by the main tones guiding them, and you can see there's a lot of focus here, there we go, on C sharp, and then there's a kind of change in the main tone to E flat right there. And here's an example from it. All right, sorry to cut it off. So Yun's compression of melody to a main tone is also an example of the final form of compression I want to discuss, the compression of traditions. Yun translates the gestures and timbres of Korean music onto Western instruments, rewriting Eastern musical concepts through Western musical systems. Let's take a look at an example from this Korean zither from the Gach family, and let's take a look at a few things that are drawn upon for the piece Glissé, a solo cello piece. So here, Da-Som Park plays the Chol Hyung Yum, excuse me, pardon my pronunciation, with a plectrum, and she's also bending the pitches with her other hand. And we can take a little bit of a listen to this example. Maybe. There we go. So here we can see a few ideas ripe for translation, plucked strings and sliding tones, and we can hear those in the third movement of Yun's glissé, which we'll be fortunate to hear later on today, where chords are plucked with a guitar pick. You can see those here. There, and there. And then where also sliding tones are created by the left hand. You can see the sliding tones. Oh, oops, more plucked tones, sorry. There's a little bit of a lag in the clicker. And now we can see the sliding tones here in green. And there should be a musical excerpt. Okay, more sliding tones. There we go. Okay. So how then does Yun narrate this compression of traditions that constitutes his musical sensibility? He says, quote, "My music can be heard as Eastern or Western. This tells you my situation exactly. I'm not a typical East Asian, nor am I Europeanized. I had to struggle to gain an understanding of Western music, and afterwards I had to remember that I was from Asia. For the first time I was able to study, to express that which is Eastern in myself, that which is flowing in the language of Western music. But instead of letting it flow, I intended to build, to make a structure in such a way that it is exactly what I want to say in the musical language, which is totally my own, original. You know, though I do not have any interest in the question of whether I compose Western or Eastern music, I write the music that I have to write because I am just myself. Surely the musicologists can busy themselves with making long analyses." Apologies to Mr. Yun. But he's getting at what I've long been busy analyzing. When you compress traditions, something new is generated, right? He speaks of an original musical language that he's developed from this kind of compression. We can see this with many artists like Haegue, like Stefan Volpa, like Igor Stravinsky, artists who are, in the words of Bridget Cohen, migrant moderns. They develop expressive capacities out of personal experiences in their home culture, which are translated through cultures which they then move, or through which they then move. From these dispersions come their singular artistic voices. And that's what I think Yun explains here. The question, is he Eastern, is he Western, where does he fit, become fruitless conversations after a while and risk becoming base essentialisms. And I don't want to reduce either Yun or Yang to Western or Eastern stereotypes. Rather, I am interested in the compression of one tradition onto another, a process that preserves the tensions apparent not only in cultural translation, but also in the kind of ekphrastic translations across media in which Yang is concerned in her installation Star-Crossed Rendezvous. So by way of conclusion, I want to suggest that we can also see this kind of cultural compression at work in Yang's practice, evident especially in her mesmerizing Mesh series, an example of which you can see here. These works draw on different traditions of paper cutting, Korean, Slavic, Mexican, Chinese, Jewish. These techniques are compressed in a single artwork, much in the way that Yun layers musical traditions into his pieces. In my interpretation, this is where Yang and Yun's practices meet. Yang, like Yun, takes up different kinds of cultural traditions, and by working through them, makes them her own. And so what I've hoped to do is to give you some ideas that may direct our listening later on to Yun's music in today's concert, and some concepts that can help us appreciate Yang's long investment in Yun's legacy. And so may we hear Yang's art and see Yun's music more vividly. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, MOCA, Clara Kim, and Haegue Yang for the honor of this invitation. My name is Mina Lee. I'm a musicologist, busying myself with making long analysis of music that composers make. So the last time I was in LA was in June when the LA Philharmonic hosted a week-long soul festival featuring new works by Korean composers. It's rare for a major US orchestra to devote an entire week to new music, let alone to living composers from abroad. But LA has long nurtured adventurous programming through series like Green Umbrella, where new voices have consistently found home. And on behalf of New Yorkers, let me just say thank you for sharing Gustavo Dudamel with us. We're thrilled to have him and to have see new music take center stage. Today's symposium on Isang Yun reflects that same spirit of openness in LA's arts world. Openness not only to new sounds and ideas, but also to the histories and resonances they carry. However, that openness also highlights a striking contrast. In Korea, Isang Yun is remembered as one of the nation's most prominent composers. His legacy endures through the Tongyang International Music Festival, which originally started as Isang Yun International Festival, and his namesake competition that launches young performers. His works remain part of the living repertoire there. In Germany, too, where he spent most of his career, his presence is palpable. His music is performed regularly, especially in Berlin, the home of the Isang Yun House. In the United States, however, that picture changes dramatically. Here, Yun is almost absent, rarely programmed by major orchestras and seldom discussed in scholarship, despite the oeuvre that includes 5 large symphonies, 2 chamber symphonies, and numerous solo chamber and vocal works. Today, one is most likely to encounter his music not in professional halls, but in student recitals that require people to program lesser-known composers. All of these compelled me to ask, how did the composer celebrated as a towering figure in Korea and Germany become nearly invisible in the American musical landscape? What political or cultural conditions have shaped this experience? And what might the silence reveal about the ways we listen to, label, and value music that crosses cultural and ideological boundaries? So to begin answering these questions, I'd like to consider Isang Yun today through 3 thematic pillars: visibility and silence, fragmentation and transformation, and memory and mediation, each shedding light on aspects of his life, music, and afterlife. Let's begin with visibility and silence, a theme that captures how Yun's life was both seen and overlooked in different parts of the world. As the video that Haegue has put in so wonderfully, Yun's story begins in 1917 in a Korea under Japanese occupation. He came of age when artistic expression was deeply intertwined with the struggle for national identity, and his involvement in the anti-Japanese resistance movement led to imprisonment and torture in the early 1940s. After liberation, he taught at various schools and composed mostly songs, including art songs, children's songs, and school songs. At the same time, as Korea rebuilt its cultural life from the ashes of war and began charting new musical paths, Isang Yun became a leading advocate for new post-tonal music. In 1955, at age 40, he left for Europe to deepen his studies in post-tonal music. Within just a few years, his works were performed at major festivals such as Darmstadt, Gaudeamus, and Donaueschingen, where he gained reputation or recognition as an emerging voice within the post-war avant-garde. At a time when few Korean composers could study abroad, news of his success, especially at the heart of contemporary music, carried profound significance back home and inspired a sense of new possibility for the Koreans. And yet, when Yun visited the United States in 1966 for the first time, his presence barely registered. He toured New York, Boston, Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, and Aspen, with performances at Tanglewood and likely Aspen, and there were even early discussions of a possible Detroit Symphony Commission. We know of the trip today mainly through his wife's memoir, but it left almost no trace in American concert reviews or press coverage. Less visible, too, was the role U.S. cultural institutions played in shaping Yun's career. At the time of his 1966 sojourn, he was living in West Berlin with support from the Ford Foundation's Artists in Residence program, an American-funded Cold War initiative designed to bolster Western Berlin's cultural and intellectual life. Its cosmopolitan roster, and you can see the list of countries of the participants, reflected a mission to connect the divided city to a wider creative world. But the transnational support soon collided with geopolitics. In 1967, as Haegue's video showed, Yun was abducted from West Berlin by secret agents of the South Korean government under Park Chung-hee's authoritarian regime and was charged with espionage along with nearly 200 other Korean intellectuals across Europe. Viewed as having the closest ties to North Korea, Yun was initially sentenced to death. His arrest sparked an international outcry. Musicians across Europe and the United States mobilized on his behalf. Among them was the American composer Elliott Carter, whom Yun had first met in Berlin in 1964 during Carter's Ford Foundation residency. The program's unusually generous funding allowed Carter to bring Yun to Berlin and support his stay, and I thank Professor Ann Schreffler for bringing this detail to light. Carter also wrote to the New York Times, helping draw public attention to the case, and he joined the petition circulated by leading US music organizations. The petition described Yun as a distinguished composer whose music served as a mediator between cultures. It argued that silencing Yun would deprive the global community of an essential artistic voice. Meanwhile, the Department of State refused diplomatic intervention, calling it a South Korean security matter. American newspapers briefly reported his abduction and the protests surrounding it, but once the crisis passed, interest faded. Still, global pressure secured Yun's release after 2 years on the condition that he never returned to South Korea. He settled in Germany, where he became a naturalized citizen in 1971. From then on, the divide deepened. The scandal amplified his visibility in Europe, and he even wrote an opera for the ceremony, one of the ceremonies of the 1972 Munich Olympics. Meanwhile, North Korea recast his persecution within its propagandistic narrative and elevated him as a cultural hero. Throughout the 1980s, a research institute, an orchestra, and a concert hall were established in Pyongyang in Yun's honor. With the North being the only Korea that welcomed him, Yun continued to build ties with its regime, further exacerbating his estrangement from the South. Accordingly, his works remained silenced in South Korea until 1988, when the ban on artists linked to North Korea was lifted. Even then, despite several attempts at reconciliation with the South Korean government, Yun was never allowed to return home, even missing a 1994 concert held in Seoul in his honor. When Korean musicians and scholars finally began re-engaging his music, European colleagues who had worked closely with him became crucial mediators of that rediscovery. Among such musicians was Heinz Holliger, oboist and close friends of Yun's, who appears later in today's program. In this story of recovering and remembering Yun's legacy and music, America still lingers at the margins. After brief attention on his political scandal in 1968, American institutions offered little sustained engagement. My recent survey of Isang Yun studies in the US, examining media coverage, academic journals, dissertations, conferences, and university curricula, revealed scattered awareness, but no active presence, like a faint murmur. His name circulates mainly among the advanced students and new music performers, but rarely appears in major concert halls and almost never in music history textbooks. In short, he is known by name, but his music is seldom truly heard or understood. Some might ask, why the big deal? Not every great composer endures, and history is full of once celebrated figures who fell into obscurity. But when erasure is regional and not universal, and when a composer remains vivid elsewhere but absent here, we must ask, why here and not there? Given Yun's early Ford Foundation support, connections to American composers, appearances at Aspen and Tanglewood, and even prospective US Commission, his fading presence in the American musical landscape invites reflections on how political, ideological, and Cold War politics and ideology and Cold War silences shaped what could be heard and what could not. Of course, part of the answer concerns aesthetic taste. Yun's music emerged within the German post-war avant-garde, dense, expressionistic, and rigorously structured. Meanwhile, American new music was veering toward experimentalism, minimalism, and indeterminacy. In that sense, Yun did not neatly fit into the prevailing narrative of American contemporary music. But taste is seldom neutral. It is historically and culturally conditioned. Yun's music, forged through experiences of trauma, exile, and division, carries a politically charged intensity. As you heard some clippings, his sound word often strikes listeners as taut and searching, marked by a longing for a Korea he could not return to and by a desire for reconciliation across lines of separation. Such intensity resonated in post-war Germany, but did not elicit the same response in the US. To grasp this difference, we now turn to the second thematic pillar, fragmentation and transformation, a theme that captures what his music is made of. If I were ever asked to define the overarching aesthetic of Isang Yun's music, although no one ever has, I would say it lies in the coexistence of opposites and in their convergence into unity. Yun described his compositional process as capturing the sounds of the universe or seizing the sounds already floating in nature. For him, nature was built on contrast, day and night, light and shadow, heaven and earth. This Taoist and Buddhist sense of duality forms the backbone of his music. He explained, the universe resonates with an inaudible flow of sounds. That is the meaning of Taoism. Much like water shaping its course and diverse streams intertwining and converging, sound also traverses infinite time and space. The perpetual interplay of opposites and their movement toward harmony manifest on every level of his music, from adjacent gestures and the ebb and flow of phrases to the broader musical narrative reflecting the divisions in his life. So let's start with the level of gestures. His scores often seem in constant flux, with stark contrasts between softness and force, incessant crescendos and decrescendos, and passages that rapidly ascend and plunge. In Glisses, one of the works we'll hear today, the cellist continually alternates between pizzicato, or plucking, and arco, bowing. While these are standard Western techniques, Yun also drew connections to Korean traditional string instruments such as the zither gomungo, and Haegue. So I regret that these don't really show the shaking of the strings but Ryan's videos did that. And that's the technique called the shigimse, where once the note is sounded, the performer shakes the string to give it a sort of an afterlife. And it's a very prominent technique in Korean traditional music. And Yun often tries to recreate that in his works. This idea of enlivening a single pitch is central to his music, and I'll return to it shortly. Glisse is also filled with sudden shifts in dynamics and vibrato. Oh, please go back. Oh, I'll just say it. Yes, it had scores that shows lots of trills and contrast between dense and sparse textures, and yes, those that animate the musical surface. The tension between opposing forces also operates at the structural level. As the music unfolds, gestures that initially seem at odds begin to interweave through continual transformation, eventually coalescing into a unified sound force. This process underlies Yun's key technique, hoptone or hoptone, which Ryan explained so wonderfully. In this approach, a single note or a small cluster of notes acts as the gravitational center, while surrounding gestures bend, circle, and strive toward it. Oh. Okay. Excuse me. There we go. This passage is from Images, another work on today's program, and it shows a miniature version of that process of a hop tone. Here, the flute's line establishes the main tone on B flat. The blue markings on the score are my annotations, tracing how the line circles around the main tone marked with ovals. The diagram below simply extracts that blue path of the score to show in distilled form how the phrase establishes the main tone, embellishes it, and then returns to it. As you can see, Yun does not present the pitch outright. Instead, he offers a meandering approach. The motions of striving, hovering, and circling the notes themselves are the expression core of the phrase. And here's what it sounds like. And there are other instruments underneath that flute line, of course. Now, the principle of contrast also operates at the phrasal and sectional levels. The very opening of Images offer a striking example. The first phrase, the 5 measures, the first phrase, uses the 12-tone method, a system developed by Arnold Schoenberg. Without going into technical details too much, this method arranges all 12 notes of the chromatic scale into a fixed order without repeating or favoring any pitch over any other. The second phrase, from measures 5 to 10, also uses a 12-tone method, but begins to repeat and sustain certain notes, which signals that there is movement toward convergence. The third phrase is the hop tone passage that we just heard. Across these first 3 phrases, Yun's intention becomes clear. 12-tone writing treats all pitches as equal, whereas hop tone centers expression around a single pivotal tone. One represents maximal dispersion, the other concentrated world of hop tone. One is linked to German modernism, the other to Korean traditional music. He presents these contrasts right at the opening, like a kind of musical thesis statement, like the first page of a novel, announcing that this piece will explore the interplay of opposites and moving toward unity. As the music unfolds, you will hear stark contrasts between sections of great density and tension and others that are sparse in ways that offer relief. In the final minutes, as you listen later, after a journey through continual flux, a series of main tone groups, or haptone, begin to emerge, rising from turbulence like shapes coming into focus in a kaleidoscope. Such musical narrative mirrors the ruptures of Yun's life. Caught between cultures and allegiances, he composed from a place of displacement and dislocated identity. His music does not merely juxtapose East and West. It weaves fragments of memory and longing into sound. Contrast in his music thus becomes expressions of the ruptures that shaped his life. This idea is realized most poignantly in images. Inspired by the fresco of the 4 guardian deities that he saw in North Korea in 1963, a visit that later became one of the triggers for his arrest, he composed the work in a guarded hospital room during his imprisonment in Seoul. This understanding that brokenness can be worked rather than erased also echoes through Haegue Yang's practice. One of her early works, Storage Piece from 2004, she gathered belongings she had no place to store as she moved from country to country and bound them into structural mass. She turned the reality of displacement into a powerful meditation on the state of being unmoored. A similar perspective shaped Sadong 30 from 2006, an installation she created in her grandmother's abandoned house in Korea, where personal belongings were arranged across the walls and floor in a loose constellation. By assembling fragments of family history within a jilted space, Yang made fracture itself a generative force. She thus joins a lineage of artists who navigate multiple cultural places and refashion ruptures and dislocation into artistic renewal. By entering into dialogue with artists who share similar experiences, her works enact memory and mediation, the third conceptual pillar of my talk. In the final part of my presentation, I'd like to return to where we began, meditating on how we might re-listen to Isang Yun in the present after decades of political, cultural, and aesthetic distance. Haegue Yang's star-crossed Rendezvous after Yun offers a powerful answer, showing that we can remember him anew through forms and sensibilities that bridge their works across time. Here, she engages Yun's 1977 work, Double Concerto for Oboe and Harp with a Small Orchestra. The concerto draws on a Korean folktale about 2 lovers, a cowherd and a princess, condemned to live apart on opposite sides of the Milky Way. Once a year, on the 7th day of the 7th month, magpies and crows form a bridge with their wings so the lovers may reunite. This accounts for the birds shedding around this time, and rain on that day is said to be the lovers' joyful tears. Yun reimagined this cosmic tale as a metaphor for Korea's division, and in turn, as an expression of the distance and reunion of various instrumental sounds. The 2 solo instruments embody the lovers, the oboe as cowherd and harp as princess, while their dialogue across the orchestra becomes an allegory of separation and relation. And the work was dedicated to his close friend Heinz Holliger and his harpist wife Ursula. Something that Yun's Double Concerto and Yang's Star-Crossed Rendezvous share is a meditation on distance, spatial, temporal, and relational, and on the possibility of convergence. In Yun's work, The oboe and harp move through cycles of separation and return, each occupying its own sonic terrain shaped by color, register, and gesture. Yang's installation offers an analogous spatial relation. The Venetian blind structure divides space, yet allow glimpses across it, redirecting light and linking one area to another. Time, too, takes some parallel forms. Yun's score moves through volatile states of tension and release, tracing shifting relationships among its musical voices. In Yang's work, time becomes both experiential and historical. The presence of music itself makes the passage of time palpable for the spectators, even as historical distance collapses when Yun's music from 1977 is self-rooted in ancient folklore, enters the present. As in Sadong 30, where she reawakens fragments of lived time, Yang reminds us that art emerges through continual revisiting and re-remembering, revealing a sense of time that is layered rather than linear. Thus, Star-Crossed Rendezvous invites us to hear Yun's music anew through a meditation that brings past and present into the same frame of experience. In this spirit, as a final reflection, I'd like to propose two ways of listening to Yun's music. The first is to hear it as a journey, a kind of dialectical unfolding. As I noted earlier, the idea of hop tone is essentially about process, the continual negotiation of tension and release, motion and stillness, conflict and accord. It is, in other words, a music of becoming. The second mode is more contemplative. Yun once remarked that, and I quote here, "A single sound must contain the idea of the whole piece." Then, perhaps, a single gesture or moment can be a point of meditation. In this fluid mode of listening, if we lose our way amid its density or complexity, that is all right. This is music that invites return, and it'll reveal something new with each listen. I'd like to offer one final thought. As we remember Isang Yun today, perhaps we can look beyond the single narrative of nation or exile, of cultural or political allegiance. Those frames remain relevant, but cannot contain the full range of his music. Instead, we might listen for the ways his music moves between histories, through time, and across media. From that perspective, remembering Yun is not a matter of returning to a fixed past, but of noticing how our understanding shifts as his music enters new contexts and new encounters, something we experience so richly in Haegue Yang's Star-Crossed Rendezvous. And if his music began as a response to displacement and separation, it endures as a language of relation and connection, one that continues to open new ways of listening, seeing, and remembering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina, and to Ryan for such brilliant, evocative presentations on the music of Isang Yun and of Haegue's art. I am certainly learning quite a bit from your presentations, and I think this is evidence of the need to bring different fields and disciplines together ever more. So it was really a treat to hear both of you speak. I don't want to break this up, but we will take a short lunch break, and we'll reconvene here at 2 o'clock for the afternoon sessions, whereby we'll have the tribute video from Heinz Holliger, the musical performances by the musicians of Colburn School. So please come back at 2 o'clock. I just want to point out that Haegue has a really beautiful installation up in our galleries in a collection show called Diary of Flowers on one side of the galleries upstairs. So I encourage you to look at that. And please come back at 2 o'clock, where we'll also be joined by Mina and Ryan for the panel that will conclude the day, and you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. So thank you again to Mina and Ryan, and we'll see you at 2.